Hello, 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 Reza. How are you today?
I'm good, Shay. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, very well. It's another episode of Future Forward.
Yeah.
That always excites us, doesn't it?
Yes. And this one today, Shay, is the future of airports and the cities they shape. And really, the key question that we're asking here, can cities shape airports to serve people rather than passengers? And so I'm really excited about jumping into this one, Shay.
Yeah,
But
it'll
before
be
we,
a good
yeah,
one.
before we do that, let's welcome our listeners.
Yes, yes. To all our listeners, old and new, welcome. Just again, we always say how appreciative we are of our old listeners who stuck with us through 49, 50 episodes or so now. And to our new listeners, welcome as well. We hope you enjoyed the episode today and then go back and check out our back catalog here. And Future Forward is a conversation Reza and I have been having for a few years now. And around this time last year, we decided to invite everyone into the conversation about the history of cities, specifically when we would have these conversations every Friday at the coffee shop. It was around the city we live in, Austin, but expanded it to the cities we live in, the history of the cities, the systems that operate in these cities, and what is currently going on with the energy system, the water system, play, community, families, as we project strategically into the future of what is possible, all wrapped around some 21 laws of cities that we've developed as we've just dug into and explored this idea of the future of cities. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And as Reza just said, we are diving into the future of airports today.
Yeah, Shay, uh, the idea for this episode, it comes from my son Zal when we were traveling last year. And so we added to our list and now we're finally picking it up.
Yeah.
And since, Shay, you and I have been traveling these last few months, so we thought it'd be good to deep dive on this. But before we jump into our typical format of, history and, talk about the present with a couple of case studies and then strategic foresight, I wanted to take a minute for us to share our early memories of airports. For you and me, I know they have a special place in our lives. We both grew up in another country. I grew up in Mumbai, and you grew up in Lagos, and an airport was like a portal into the broader world. So
Absolutely.
I'll share a little sort of tidbit from that memory, and then Shay, you can do the same. But I remember going to an airport or going to fly somewhere was like a special occasion. We wore
Yeah.
special clothes. We always dressed up. And, like my brother and I, sometimes we'd wear the matching outfit. My mom
Yeah.
would put us in a matching outfit. And, my brother is a year younger than I am, Mimo. And I distinctly remember like wearing these matching outfits. We'd go to the airport. We were like so excited because we were going to go on a plane. This was in the old days when you used to get on a bus to drive out on the tarmac, then you got off the bus and you climbed up the ladder. And once you got on the plane, there was like the smell of, I don't know, another country when you got on the plane because it didn't smell like India anymore. You already knew when you got on the plane you've left India and you're
Yeah.
like, gone somewhere else. So, I have this special feeling every time I go to an airport, this excitement of traveling, of being in the air, of being away from the troubles of the world. And, it still is a special time for getting on a plane at the airport. So what about you, Shay?
Oh my goodness, you are so correct about the matching clothing. That is crazy that it was not just my mom who made us do that, but we honestly didn't care, Reza. It was just
It was,
we were so excited to
yeah.
be leaving. And the earliest memories I have, so there was a point when my dad was living and working in the UK, and we were in Nigeria, and my mom wouldn't tell us where we were going, but we would suspect because she'd pack the suitcases and we're like, we're about to travel. And this was a point when you didn't need visas to go anywhere.
Yeah.
You just got to the airport and literally bought your ticket at the gate,
Yeah. Wow.
at the counter at the airport. And there were numerous flights flying from Lagos to London and other parts of the world at that point. And she'd buy an evening ticket going to London, and it was so much excitement. She had us, I believe it was three boys at that point, and we were just giddy, trying not to misbehave, because at the back of our minds would be this risk that if we do something silly, she might take us back home, which in hindsight was absolutely never going to happen. But that was my first memory, and it was the same thing. It was this portal to a different place, and you knew it was however long you were there. Lots of fun, a great time, and the airport and the airplane had facilitated that transition to a different world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a picture of your childhood, my childhood about airports, and it's funny how we share some of the same memories of that. And so airports have become important for cities, but it wasn't always that way. They didn't always play a starring role in the city economies like they do today. The history of airports begins with the early days of aviation in the early 20th century. The airfields were built primarily on the urban fringe. Think open grassy fields used for mail and military purposes in the 19s and 20s. The first airports were established following the Wright brothers' pioneering flight in 1903 with facilities like College Park Airport in Maryland, 1909 being among the earliest. The interwar period between the two world wars saw, a lot of advancement in airport development as commercial aviation emerged. Early terminals with simple buildings that were just, designed to process passengers. But airports then, after that, quickly evolved as air travel became more popular. Kind of sort of entered the jet age, as they used to call it. So
Mm,
commercial air travel really began to scale after World War II. Airports, evolved from these basic transport nodes into complex hubs of logistics, commerce, and connection. Um, the introduction of the jet aircraft in the 50s brought more infrastructure improvements. They needed extended runways, they needed enhanced terminal buildings to accommodate more of these passengers. And the concept of the international airport emerged in this period with airports. They became gateways between nations. They served as critical infrastructure for globalization. And so by the 1990s, airports had become, aerotropolises, which I love this word. It was a concept popularized by John Casarda, where cities grew around the airport rather than airports adapting to the city. And so these hubs facilitated trade, global tourism. It caused urban sprawl, but also it brought noise pollution, emissions, and significant equity concerns. And so, it goes back to that question that I raised at the start. Can cities shape airports to serve people, not just passengers? And that's what we're going to explore in the rest of the episode. But let me pause over here, Shay, and see what your thoughts are.
yeah, no, it's a phrase that I hadn't heard until I was reading through your show notes, but it's such a good framing for the centrality of airports in some of the major cities, even as the airport is in some cases right outside the city. Everything sort of gravitates towards it if the city is quite keen to create this economic framework around the airport. And I know you'll dive into that in a little bit more detail, but such a good framing for the present, and honestly, to a certain extent, some of the future we expect to see in cities as it relates to airports. So I'll let you dive in, but thanks for adding that word to the nomenclature for me and for the listeners as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
good to pull that out. Yeah, I always like to find like we love finding these concepts
we
that we
do.
latch onto, and so I thought this would be one that you'd like as well. So yeah, so let's dive in. Let's talk about this airport city dynamics. What's happening in the present day? They're no longer transit zones. They're logistics centers. They're retail hubs. They're business parks. They're community actors, and so expanding or building them comes at a steep cost. It's social, environmental, and financial. And so they've evolved into these massive infrastructure projects. They've had significant economic and environmental footprints as they've grown. There are approximately 41,800 airports worldwide. That's a lot, with over 5,000 providing commercial passenger services. So there are a lot of other airports, but 5,000 that, we pay attention to. The
Yeah.
largest handle astonishing passenger volumes. For example, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport processes nearly 106 million passengers in 2023. So it is the world's busiest airport by passenger traffic. We were talking about that in the last episode, Future
Absolutely.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
So here it is. It is the largest one by passenger traffic. Um, Today, airports have enormous economic impact on their surrounding regions. The aviation industry supports approximately 65.5 million jobs globally,
Mm.
contributes 2.7 trillion to worldwide GDP. Major airport hubs serve as economic engines, with every 1,000 air transport jobs estimated to support up to 6,000 jobs in the local economy,
Wow.
in the service sector beyond it. But airports face significant challenges, including capacity constraints, environmental impacts, community opposition to expansion. I'm going to touch on this when we get in the case study.
Yeah.
The aviation sector contributes approximately 2.5% of global CO2 emissions, with additional climate impacts from non-CO2 effects, of the airport buildings and other systems around it. Noise pollution affects communities within the vicinity of airports, often creating tension between economic benefits and quality of life concerns. So before I jump into the case studies, Shay, let me pause over here and see what you think.
Yeah, and it's such a good segue into some of what you're about to dive into because I first time flying into Chicago. Chicago has two big airports, one on the north side and one on, I believe, is more west south, if
Yeah.
I can think about that layout correctly. And as you drive from either one, honestly, but more specifically Midway Airport, you do notice you are in a part of the city that feels like it's not getting as much love as the airport itself is.
Interesting.
And you're going to dive into that. There's a ton of environmental, financial, and social factors that go into play there. Even as the airport is a big part of the city, in the part of the city where the airport is, there's this huge disconnect. And it's not just Chicago. I feel that about a lot of the cities that have more than one airport mainly. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so excited for you to like dive into the details
Yeah.
in the next section here. Yeah.
Yeah, Shay, that's great sort of point that you're making over there about this challenge that airports have as they become part of cities. And so I picked these two case studies. One of them is Heathrow Airport, and the other one is Navi Mumbai Airport. And so, Heathrow is trying to expand to a third runway. So this is really an expansion versus equity challenge.
Uh,
It's Europe's busiest airport by international passenger traffic. It handles over 80 million passengers annually. Both of us have traveled through there.
yeah.
We know what it's like going through there. It's also among the top global hubs for air freight. So that's an interesting tip there. So the controversial third runway, the expansion plan aims to increase Heathrow's capacity by 260,000 flights annually,
Uh,
potentially generating 61 billion in economic benefits, creating up to 77,000 jobs by 2030. However, the project would require demolishing approximately 750 homes and
uh,
significantly increase aircraft noise for thousands of London residents. It was approved in 2018. The project faced multiple legal, environmental, and community pushbacks. In 2020, the Court of Appeals ruled the plan unlawful due to climate commitments,
uh,
although the UK Supreme Court reversed that decision. And so the projects going forward, the impact of the city, it's expected to add 61 billion to the UK economy over 60 years, with a lot of these jobs that I mentioned. But this air and noise pollution in West London really is impactful, and it challenges the UK's net zero commitments that they're trying to do by 2050. And so it highlights this complex relationship between airports and cities. While this airport contributes, 9.7 billion annually to the London economy and supports over 76,000 direct jobs, the expansion's environmental impact and effect really is a concern. And so it raises this question about sustainable urban planning and the balance between economic growth and environmental protection. That balance that we always talk about, the
yeah.
economic and ecological balance. And so Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, he was opposed to the Heathrow Airport, and he had this quote in 2019, which kind of puts a pin on it. Climate change is the biggest challenge facing humanity. We can't pretend a third runway at Heathrow is consistent with zero carbon future. So that is like one perspective on this challenge over here.
Uh.
So Shay, yeah, this is, you can see the benefit, but you can also see the troubling uh, things around this. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well covered in terms of the economic and the ecological. The interesting thing is, I found a stat that suggested And this came from S&P Global's assessment of the need for a third runway at Heathrow, and that the 20 to 25 billion dollar expansion would increase the airport's debt burden because
Mm,
the financing of this airport is going to add on top of what is already a $20 billion debt burden on the airport. So a few weeks, months ago or so, we had the situation where the company, the airport had a power outage.
mm,
If you remember
yes,
that, the
I do.
power outage, and some of it really boils down to the infrastructure that needs to go around to
Mm,
support the airport and the resilience that is required, which is already under strain.
yeah,
The airport infrastructure is under strain. The city's infrastructure is under strain. And now we're about to add a debt burden along with increased infrastructure strain and stress.
yeah,
So while it will ease flight burdens for our last trip through Heathrow was fine. There was no real issue. But it could be better, as you can imagine.
yeah,
It said at what cost though? At
yeah,
what cost?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So thanks for
That's
highlighting that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like how you described like the that power outage and how it's connected with the rest of the city. It's the, it's
Absolutely.
not in isolation. So that's we don't build cities, we don't build airports in isolation of the city. It's part of the system,
Yeah.
and it's affecting the whole city. The next one here, Shay, the second case study is Navi Mumbai International Airport. And the goal over here, that Mumbai sees is it's like a city building catalyst. It represents a different approach to airport development. It's building a completely new facility to address capacity constraints of the existing airport. Mumbai's current CSM airport reached its operational capacity, and so it's prompting this development as a second airport for a metropolitan region. And so they're taking this, instead of expanding the current one and displacing people there, they're trying to build a whole new one and bring some benefits to the part of Mumbai that hasn't really developed. So it has a planned capacity of 60 million passengers by 2032. It's built on a greenfield site with significant land reclamation because Mumbai has a lot, it's a coastal city, so they actually have to reclaim land. So
Uh,
1,700 hectares of development reclaimed. The project is being developed through a public-private partnership with an estimated cost of over 2.2 billion for the initial phases. It's expected to significantly alleviate congestion at the current airport and really supporting Mumbai's continued growth as a financial and commercial center. So it does unlock, there's some pros, it unlocks growth in Mumbai's underserved eastern corridor where it's being built. So it'll estimate to create over 200,000 jobs directly and indirectly. But the cons, the project has faced numerous challenges, including land acquisition issues,
yeah.
environmental concerns related to mangrove destruction and the diversion of rivers. So again, it's a coastal city. Mangroves are swamps. It helps sort of soak up, excess monsoon rains and it helps with flooding. 3,000 families displaced with questions around resettlement and compensation. But despite these obstacles, construction is progressing with the first phase to be operational soon. And so this one demonstrates how cities are approaching airport capacity issues with a greenfield project rather than expansions. And this new airport is integrated into a broader urban development in the Navi Mumbai region,
Uh,
with associated transportation infrastructure, including highways, metro connections, and rail links. I talked about one of those bridges between Navi Mumbai and Mumbai in the future Mumbai episode. So
yeah.
the integrated approach aims to create an aerotropolis or airport city where the airport serves as the nucleus for broader economic development here. So there's some promising things on this one, Shay.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely positives. One of the things that was popping in mind for me as you were talking about that is that there's this and I'll I believe this is the experience that is being modified. When you go to some of the major airports in some of the countries outside of the West, the experience you have at the airports clouds your take of the city.
Yeah.
And so, as much as the government is trying to improve the airport experience with this greenfield project, it's as much about how people experience Mumbai when they come in.
Yeah.
And I think we should never poo-poo on as much that needs to be done to essentially, we talked about the transition from one place to another.
Yes.
When you get to a country, that experience, I won't say Mars, but it marks how you feel about the place
Yes.
as a first point of entry. And this one sounds like one that is necessary. Hopefully, they can address the making sure the residents that were there before get placed properly with fairness and equity as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah. So before you get to the 21 laws, I just want to sort of close out this section by talking about, these case studies are illustrating that airports are not just for passengers, but they're for people too, because there are these people that are around the airports. There are people that are served by the airports. Even how you talked about how the airport gives you an impression of the city as soon as you come. You're coming as a passenger, but you're coming to visit the city as a person.
Yeah,
And you're coming to sort of interact with the city in a way that is a positive. And so I really loved how you brought that up. It is about the people that come to the airport that you're serving, not just them as passengers. So I really
absolutely.
like that framing.
Absolutely. And it really frames how you pick the laws as well. Just again, laws, we've come to them from a place of how does the city serve the needs of the people in the city? And in this case, yes, they're visitors in some cases, but at the end of the day, for the period while they're there, they
Yeah.
need to experience the city from what we believe are 21 laws that help improve the just the soul
Yeah.
of the city. And so the first law we have here that you've picked, Reza, is number 4, regional cooperation enhances sustainability. Sustainable cities cannot exist in isolation. We know this. And the airport, in conjunction with the city it is right by, become one system. Even if they start off as separate systems, they become one system. And every other city or community around the airport as much cooperation that is possible to coordinating cooperation to enhance the sustainability is not just to improve the airport, it is to help
Yeah.
every city or town and the communities around the airport. And this comes from research from Willer 2002, where the argument was made for the importance of regional approaches to urban sustainability, with the consequences being inefficient resource use if you don't cooperate, conflicting land use policies, and inability to address cross-boundary environmental issues. And some of this is playing out in Austin here, actually, with the expansion of Austin and some
Mm-hmm.
of the land that's being reclaimed. What was the intended purpose for that land? Who owns the land? Is an airport the best thing to put here,
Mm-hmm.
considering some of the resource constraints we're already experiencing as it relates to water in that part of the city? So this law absolutely
Yeah.
kicks in here. And I'll touch on Austin's airport again. It's not too far from the Tesla Gigafactory
Mm-hmm.
and Mena, and we're already having water issues, availability issues in that part of the city.
Wow.
The expansion is absolutely going to cause some unsustainable approaches to water use, and there's not as much cooperation as is required going on there. So I just wanted to point that out as a flouting of the law number 4 there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second law you picked, Reza, law 15, climate resilience is an urban imperative, which states that cities must adapt to climate change impacts while simultaneously working to mitigate their own contributions to global warming. This comes from Rosenzweig and a few other researchers, highlighting the crucial role of cities in climate change adaptation and mitigation. We've talked about this a lot. Failure to address this just causes fragility in our city systems, leaving cities vulnerable to extreme weather events, sea level rise, and other climate risks.
Yeah, I feel very conflicted about this, the climate resilience one. I really like how you sort of gave the regional cooperation example of Austin and Manor and the water issue there. But this climate resilience one um, airports are an economic engine, but they're also impact, climate issues. And
Yeah,
so how do you balance that
yeah,
is the real challenge over here because we see the benefit, we've lived the benefit of airports and the trade and the connections it creates around the world.
Yeah.
But we quite haven't cracked the nut on, well, how can that be done in a more climate neutral way? Really, really challenging for aviation to do that. So,
It is, it is. There's a lot of work in the realm of clean fuels
yeah,
for airplanes, but there's still a long way to go. Electric airplanes, maybe, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I think that really leads us to, as we start to speculate about what the future holds, to the
yeah.
strategic foresight, the strategic futures you sense might be in our future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I picked four over here, about the future of airports within the urban system. The first one is this concept of the aerotropolis that we talked about earlier, or and the airport city. This is really gaining prominence. This model views airports not just as a transportation infrastructure, but economic centers around which we build business districts, logistic facilities, hotels, retail establishments. All these things can develop, like Navi Mumbai Airport is an example of that. The second is urban integration, which is related, which is next generation airports will need to function more like public utilities, serving city needs, not just airlines. Like I talked about, airports that serve people, not just passengers. And so it needs to serve the city system and not just the airlines that fly through it. Cities like Incheon cities like that has the Incheon airport are Changi and Singapore. They continue to set benchmarks for transit-oriented development, integrating housing, logistics, and tourism with infrastructure. So they're good examples of that approach that they're taking. The third one is climate constrained aviation. And so this is what I feel conflicted about because we quite haven't cracked the nut on it, but this is really what future needs to bring. In cities that have strong climate goals, we will expect resistance to airport expansion. We already see this in Amsterdam and Schiphol, where they've cut back on the number of gates and flights and things like that. But that has impacted that has economic impacts by doing that. So they have had flight caps, congestion pricing. There can be some environmental offset mandates that could be tied to urban planning approvals. Net zero targets will push airports to electrify ground operations. That could be a positive step.
Mhm.
They could install solar or even experiment with hydrogen fuel zones and sustainable aviation fuels, like you mentioned. So there's a lot of experimentation that's still needed to help aviation become more climate neutral. And then the last one, this is sort of more, just a little wild haired idea of decentralized air hubs. We've talked about eVTOLs. There's Ironman like aircraft. But if we expand it a little further, emerging regions may leapfrog centralized models with modular regional air mobility, sort of smaller airports, smaller aircraft, maybe powered by electric aircraft or drones. So, because we're not talking about freight, freight could be moved by drones in smaller ways in a more decentralized modular way than what we have today. So yeah, so those are the four that I picked. Shay, what do you think?
No, pretty good, pretty good. Even the last one, I appreciate that you kept it in because of the fact that not all air travel through airports is people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of freight, and I think at some point, as much as we can utilize different approaches for that, not every piece of freight should come to that is coming to Austin needs to come through Austin Bergstrom, you know.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
we can do the regional mobility options, that would be great. Almost like the Amazon logistics model where
Yes.
you have different hubs for stuff. So
Yeah.
I like that one, and the rest make a ton of sense as well. Urban integration is key
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
any of these new airports as more and more people rely on air transportation to get to places. That was the case
Yeah.
apparently. Not we shouldn't be travel bans from a few countries to the US now, so we'll see what that impact is. But nonetheless, the future scenarios here make a ton of sense. So thanks so much for sharing that. Any final closing thoughts about
Yeah.
the episode?
I would say that the future of airports is it's really inseparable from the future of cities. They can catalyze urban growth, but it's only when they embed it in city first planning that protects communities, that prioritizes emissions reduction, and supports this inclusive prosperity. Like, how can those airports catalyze that type of growth? And so, just coming back to that question is, can cities shape airports to serve people, not just passengers? That's really the, closing thought that I have that I stated right up front for our listeners. I would say our call to action is that, as you fly through the next airport that you go to when you travel, think about how that airport plays a role in the city that you're traveling into. What's the impression that you have when you fly into there, leaving the airport? How are you able to get in and out of the airport in a way that feels good or not? How do the neighborhoods around the airport look as you leave the airport? Does it feel like the area is thriving or not? And so, just observe what that airport is and how it fits into the city.
Yeah, no, really, really good call to action. I'll add one line to that. When you leave the airport, instead of looking at your phone, which I do a
Mm-hmm.
lot,
Mm-hmm.
um, look up as you drive past and observe. It's a fascinating experience, especially in a city that you've not been to before. I
Yeah.
think you will learn so much about the city from that airport to destination experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mailbag time, Reza.
Yeah, we're getting some mailbags, Shay. So it's really fun to see our audience grow, and people are starting to comment and share their thoughts with us. And so let's jump into the mailbag. Before we do that, Shay, I wanna celebrate something. This is our 50th episode. And I failed to mention that at the start, but
Yes.
50 episodes in.
That
Woo!
is pretty epic. I thank you for that. I think I realized it was going to be the 50th episode, but again, we get so excited, we dive right into the
We just
episode.
want to start
Yeah.
talking.
So
But
that's
yeah,
pretty cool. That's
yeah.
pretty cool. I was talking to someone this past week and they're looking to start a podcast, and I think they should. Fascinating duo. And Brian and Karen, I believe. And I was like, 50 episodes. And they were like, wow, you guys are legit. I was like, yes, we
We
are.
are.
So, so thanks
Yeah.
for just the reminder for us to celebrate a milestone.
Yeah. So we got three mailbags here that we're going to touch on. First one is from Kyle, one of my colleagues at Document Crunch. He wrote, "I listened to The Future of Atlanta last night and I very much so enjoyed it. I'm a sucker for both world and US history, and I found this so helpful in learning about the city that I would be moving to. To know a city is to understand its history, both good and bad." Yeah, Kyle, thank you for sharing that. Kyle is employee number one at Document Crunch, just the kindest, most enthusiastic, energetic guy that I've met. He was so welcoming when I joined Document Crunch 3 months ago. I'm so grateful to. He was my buddy. He was my onboarding buddy when I started, and just kind of like a culture holder of where Document Crunch came from. And our headquarters is in Atlanta, and he's in
Yeah,
Florida, and he's moving to Atlanta now that we have a new office, like I talked about in
yeah,
the Future of Atlanta episode. And so it's really exciting to see our number one employee go to the Atlanta office and get it started, and pass along that culture to the rest of the folks there.
that's
Um,
pretty cool. And that last line, to know a city is to understand its history, both good and bad. That is such a line.
yeah, amazing,
Yeah,
amazing.
pretty awesome.
Yeah. We have another mailbag from Prodigious One. That's their user handle on YouTube in response to the Future of Atlanta episode. And he said that Alpharetta does have bus routes from Marta. And we mentioned on the episode that, Alpharetta doesn't have any transit options. And we should have been more specific. We should have talked about it doesn't have the rail option from Marta there. But he very thoughtfully came back and let us know that there are bus routes there to Alpharetta.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely a good, succinct comment to clarify something we weren't totally clear on. I'll touch on the last mailbag here, and we debated talking about this one in as much detail, but I'll touch on it. I think it's fair to respond regardless of the take. And this one is from Elliot Williams 7421, and I will not read everything he shared. If you want to read the comment, we'll leave it on YouTube. We're not taking any of these down, and it is about the 15-minute city. And he goes in, he or she or they go into a lot of detail about us not providing evidence for the 15-minute city being a good thing. And if there's a broad representation of what Elliot Williams is grouse is to a certain extent, it's that we touch on some of the benefits of 15-minute cities without confirming data or information outside of our perspective for why we believe it's a good thing. I'll read a couple lines here. Cities are for business and corporations where work and spending money is priority. 100% disagree with that.
Yeah.
You guys are on the same level as MAGA. Also disagree with that. Dreaming of bygone days you've never seen. I'm pretty certain I was walking around my neighborhood when I grew up, and it made for eyes on the street, knowing that my neighbors, my parents' friends were looking out for me, both to make sure nothing happened, but also to make sure I didn't get up to any craziness as well. That's what community does.
Yeah.
7 minutes in and zero evidence or reasoning. You obviously haven't been listening to our show, but I love that you have a perspective to share. And again, some of your points I might even take. Again, if you want to read it, you can all go read it. But the personal experience Elliot has with mixed zone mixed zoning challenges is a valuable perspective. Some cities have done it poorly, some have done it well, and not every urban planning approach works equally well in all contexts. What we always say is that how can the economic and the ecological work together to serve the cities and the residents of the cities, sustainable cities for thriving communities. So thanks for the comment, Elliot Williams. We disagree with a lot of the things you say, but we appreciate that you took time to write what is a long note here. So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for going through that, Shay. I mean, I think it goes to the ethos of our approach to the podcast is that we acknowledge different ideas. We're curious and we want to hear different perspectives. And with some of those perspectives, we learn. We're really open to learning, and we just want to engage our community of listeners. So please continue to send in your mailbags. These were great to talk about. Um, you know, we also ask you to like and subscribe, rate and review. It helps more listeners find us. As always, Shay, this was a blast.
It was.
I'm ready for my next trip. With my future forward lens on to think about airports when I
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah.
But yeah, Shay, great commentary as I shared our perspective on the future of airports, and I can't wait to do our next episode.
Absolutely. Same. I'm about to get on a flight in a few days here to Chicago. So we'll both have some views on the airport in Chicago, but also Chicago as a city. We might even
Woo.
do an episode on that
I love it. Can't wait.
shortly. Exactly. Thanks, everyone. We truly appreciate it. As always, share, like, subscribe, and all the good things so other people get to experience the future forward view of cities.
All
Bye now.
right. Bye.